So to begin our unit on Hinduism, we'll look today at a series of images drawn from a wide variety of religious experience. And what I hope this will do for us is really to give us a sense at the beginning, a visual sense of the vibrancy and the internal diversity of the Indian spiritual traditions most commonly known as Hinduism. Now, Hinduism is the most pluralistic, the least centrally organized of the traditions that we'll look at in this course. It's a family of religious traditions with almost unlimited diversity. There's no chance here for a single summarizing phrase, no suggestion that all Hindus are in agreement on what should be said or done in the world, no imposed, universal, reductive definition of core beliefs, okay? Extremely pluralistic. Now, in this image here that we're starting with, we can see a common picture of practice. Here are Hindu devotees bathing in the Ganges River. Most of you have probably heard of that, which we'll talk about a few times, and which is considered a sacred river, so sacred that it cannot itself be sullied. It can't be dirtied, but is rather, it's believed to cleanse not only itself, but everything that enters its sacred waters. So we will see that this has posed some problems in our current age of pollution and environmental awareness that Hinduism is facing in terms of challenges. Now, under the umbrella of Hinduism, one can find pantheists, polytheists, atheists, panentheists, dualists, pluralists, monists, a great many of these, a great many monists. And we'll spend a little time talking about that in a later lecture. But there's also an interesting category. So here's some definitions of the various isms that you can see under the umbrella of Hinduism. But there's one interesting category that's exhibited in the oldest of Hinduism's sacred texts, the Vedas, which we will turn to again in a later lecture. And it's called henotheism, which is this temporary flattering elevation of one god over another. So that devotees will honor one god, say Shiva, with prayers and incantations, saying things like, Shiva, you're the best, you're the essence from which all else emanates, you're the greatest, you govern all things. But then in another context, when other needs press and life is different, the same devotee might say similar things to another god, say Vishnu. Vishnu, you're the best, you're the greatest, you're the essence from which all else emanates, and upon which all else depends, and you are the central, you are the one. And for the time of that devotional experience, Shiva or Vishnu or whomever is taken to be, in fact, the greatest. But henotheism, it's the bottom one here on the slide. It comes from the word, the Greek word for one, but it's not the same as monism, which is single, or monotheism, which you see we don't really list on this because there's not a lot of monotheism that goes on in Hinduism. It's more henotheism, where if you take one god and elevate him or her above all others, but knowing that in a different life context you might elevate a different god. So it's an interesting category we see mostly in Hinduism. Now here's an image of women pouring milk on a Shiva lingam in Hyderabad. The Shiva lingam, which we'll look at again when we turn to the pantheon and spend some time with Shiva, is a non-anthropomorphic form, a non-humanized form, in which the god Shiva is often represented. You can see from this image that the Shiva lingam is a pretty explicitly phallic symbol, and it is common practice to pour milk over it or to garland it with flowers, especially during fertility rites, and that's what's pictured here. Now this brings us to another conceptual point. Hinduism is, as we've said, an internally diverse tradition, but in general, it's a tradition more concerned with orthopraxy than it is with orthodoxy. So orthodoxy means right belief, whereas orthopraxy means right practice. And Hindus don't spend a lot of energy, making windows in men and women's souls. That's a line from Queen Elizabeth. Trying to define what counts as correct belief and to determine whether or not a person holds what is considered the right belief. It's a tradition that spends far more energy looking at practice, at what's done. Relationship, kinship, these are huge here, and behaving appropriately for one's station in terms of gender, age, economics, caste is considered important. It's a good concept to consider in the context of any tradition. Some are more concerned with belief, some with practice, and some are pretty balanced, concerned with both, but moving back and forth. We've talked about how Christianity in particular is extremely concerned with orthodoxy, right? And Hinduism balances that in some way. It's extremely concerned with orthopraxy. So now we're going to run through a series of images and pick up concepts more next time, when we'll cover a few of the big ones internal to the tradition. For the remainder of this lecture, though, we'll meander through a variety of common imagistic representations of Hindu practice and just familiarize ourselves with some of the more popular practices and what they look like. So this image shows sadhus. And you've probably seen pictures of these. Sadhus are ascetic holy men. And remember, we've talked about asceticism. Ascetic, not aesthetic, having to do with beauty, but ascetic, having to do with renouncing the physical comforts of this world. And these guys are running naked into the river of Allahabad during the festival known as the Kumbh Mela, a huge pilgrimage festival held every 3 years at one of 4 sacred sites, and it rotates between them. Tens of millions of devotees attend this festival every year. Estimates of 2013's Kumbh Mela sit right around 100 million pilgrims, making this which makes this festival the single largest pilgrimage festival in the world. And here's another image from the Kumbh Mela, this one from 2010, showing an aerial view of the vast crowds that come out for this festival. We looked at the Hajj, and that's a huge festival within the tradition of Islam. This brings, the Kumbh Mela brings far more people in. So, and here again, from the Kumbh Mela, this time in 2013, a sadhu smoking a chilam, which you've probably seen. You can see that this man has dreadlocks, common for sadhus, and that his dreadlocks are decorated with prayer beads as well as with a crescent moon, which represents the god Shiva. He's painted his body in ash, which is again a common practice for sadhus. We'll see this also when we turn to Buddhism, but for now we can talk about it in terms of sadhus. For ascetics, ash is often used as a reminder of the transience of this life, a reminder that death is built into the experience of this life. And you remember that ascetics are people who renounce the physical comforts of this life, focusing their energies on questions of spiritual import. So, moving away from the Kumbh Mela, now we see women dressed in brightly colored saris. Classically, Indian dress is bright, it is vibrant, and these women are garlanding a cow. Cows, many of you will have already heard, are considered sacred within Hinduism and are often treated with a great deal of reverence, as here. They're associated with the goddess Lakshmi, whom we will meet when we look at the pantheon. Cows are associated with her, and she's a goddess of abundance and wealth, and cows fit in here because of the degree to which they offer their own goods like milk and ghee, which is clarified butter, for the use and betterment of the human community. One effect of this treatment that has been criticized, it's been in the news, is that cows are not killed, but often they can't be properly cared for. So as much as they appear in contexts like this one, where they're honored and garlanded, they also often appear in India wandering the fields and streets, malnourished, starving, because people can't afford to feed them, but they also can't kill them and eat them. So they're in this middle ground where you might be set on a pedestal and revered, but we might not be able to feed you, right? So, and this is a great example of how our ideals at times create situations that are themselves far from ideal. This is something to watch or be careful of in our own lives. This is something we all do, and more or less this is kind of an obvious example of it, but I'm pretty sure that it exists in every single one of our lives. And with this image, we can see an ideal that we know from current events is also at times tragically manifested in actual lived experience. But what I want to point out first about this image, which is a detail taken from the wall of the Lakshmi temple in Kajiharo, it's how overtly sexual it is. Hinduism does not shy away from representations of sex. The tradition is rife with such images. So here we see, there's at least 4, and then you have a smaller sort of half-human god figure, and the figure of the sort of semi-divine dwarf plays out in many a narrative. But you got more than one sexual couple here. You got a lot of interesting positions, got a lot of nudity, and it's not something. And you got a lot of self-pleasing going on and other pleasing. I mean, they're overtly sexual. Hinduism does not shy away from representations of sex. They're everywhere. The Kama Sutra, and you might have heard of this, Kama Sutra, or Sutra regarding pleasure, it's a classic example of this. Some of you may be familiar with this text, which is, basically a handbook of sexual positions and, approaches to sexuality. But pleasure is a real and honored goal within Hinduism, and sex is central to human pleasure. That's what's understood. But we want to be careful. The Kama Sutra has come into Western culture as one of the many things that are sort of romanticized and distorted as it comes into our culture. There's a whole discussion in the study of this. An author named Edward Said, wrote a book called Orientalism, where he talks about this sort of idealistic romanticizing of the Eastern traditions by the so-called West in a way that distorts what they actually are and exploits them. And so, the West has certainly exploited the Kama Sutra, and in some ways looks at sort of the Indian spiritual traditions as just like orgiastic, because of that. And, it's not really true. But pleasure is a real and honored goal. Hinduism is very pragmatic about the different things that apply to our lives. Pleasure is one of them. Sex is central to human pleasure. We can see that here. Now, the negative effects of this can be seen in contemporary cultural contexts of India right now, which is staunchly patriarchal. So men are most often considered to be in charge, of all things, and women are most often considered to be subservient in all realms. So this has led in recent years to notorious cases of rape. There's a lot of good documentaries coming out right now about this, where the rapists themselves see no problem with their actions at all, no problem. And see them as acceptable in the context of kama, or pleasure, and of patriarchal rule. So India is facing some serious challenges trying to establish laws, and more so a culture where rape is not considered acceptable. Rape in marriage is not considered acceptable. Rape when a woman is out after dark is not considered acceptable. But these are things that they're really battling within their culture to deal with. And so, it's one more time when our ideals sometimes create contexts that are not themselves ideal. But challenges and human failing aside, what we see here is, again, a lush acceptance of the sexuality that is part of embodied human life, and images such as this are not rare. Now here, we have a different temple. We have the Meenakshi temple in Mandurai, and lushness in a totally different vein. While also not uncommon, this temple is a high watermark of architectural achievement, completely covered in sculptural detail and filled with as many colors as will fit on the side of a temple. I mean, it's sort of extravagant. You can get different views. If you look up this temple, you can see it from different angles online. There's a lot of pictures of it. So, keeping with the theme of a lush acceptance of how our physical senses experience this embodied life, what we see here is a community in Los Angeles practicing kirtan, or prayerful singing, devotional song. You can see that the devotees in the front have instruments. One plays drums, and another sits in front of what looks like a box. That's a harmonium. They're cool. And common within the context of kirtan and Hindu devotional singing. It's sort of like a cross between a piano and an accordion. And if you've never heard a harmonium played, keep your eyes out for local kirtan sessions, because they're very common, in part because they're really easily transportable, and the sound they make is just amazing. It goes well with chanting. So if you have an opportunity to just stop in just to hear a harmonium being played, if you haven't, I recommend that to you. Generally, though, devotees join in on kirtan with or without an instrument. Singing and clapping are common, and it's a way for everyone to sort of get involved. And here again in California, we see devotees of Amma receiving darshan from their guru. Now, darshan is the experience of looking into the eyes of a guru or even the statue of a god or goddess, and it's a vision that is understood, even when you're looking at a statue, to be reciprocal. That is, that one sees the deity and the deity looks back at you. The vision goes both ways. So here what we see is it's with a guru, not a statue. Gurus, or teachers of great spiritual achievement, are a big part of Hindu experience for many, many people. Being near and serving the guru is a way for people to approximate a higher spiritual state until they sort of grow into that state themselves. Amma is known as the hugging saint, and you can look her up. She's done some fabulous things in this world, and she's often in California. She's got a center in San Ramon, which is not far from Humboldt. So if you get a chance, it's quite the experience. These people are smiling because they are getting darshan, which again is reciprocal vision. Okay, And here, down to the mundane level, we're going to close with a sort of more regularized, like if you can't make it to your guru and you're not doing kirtan in the high elaborate, lush world of architecture and sex, this is sort of just normal, right? This is a home altar or mandir. This one is from a home in New York, and their shape differs house to house, but most Hindu homes will have a mandir, a small altar on which devotional items such as flowers or incense or fruit are left regularly, and which one prays, or so before which prayers or mantras are spoken or offered. It's a way to focus oneself on a daily basis. Offerings left on the mandir or at a temple shrine are known as puja offerings. And here we see a woman in Nepal with a puja offering of fruit and flowers. So puja offerings are made to any number of deities, and we'll turn our attention to some of those deities in a later lecture. But they're generally really simple items, things that people can actually offer on a regular basis. So next time we'll turn our attention to some of the most important concepts in Hinduism so that we can have a shared vocabulary as we move forward into the pantheon and the common practices.